Today, we are going to make some grass. No, I'm not in Colorado, so it's not going to be that kind of grass. It's our techniques that are so simple and sensible, your mothers have practically built themselves. Hello folks, it's Maddog Merv. Today, well, we've got another installation in Maddog's muscle cars. And this one, I think we're going to call this the tale of two numbskulls. Yeah, that's what we're going to call this. It's going to be a two-parter. And so part one today is going to deal with yours truly and the 67, 68 Cougars that I owned over the years. I had a few of them. And we're going to talk a little bit about my interest in them, how I wound up with them, what I did with them. Yeah. So you might find this interesting. You might find it boring. I don't know. But we're going to try it out and see. This goes way, way back many years. There are some interesting photos of some of the old Cougars, and we'll tell you a few of the stories. So stick with us, and let's go back in time and look at some of Maddog's muscle cars. I'm going to drive around the old neighborhood that I grew up, or maybe I never did grow up, but anyway, we're going to drive around the old neighborhood. And when I was 14 years old, well, this place right here, this little apartment complex sitting right in the middle of that photo, there was a 1968 Mercury Cougar. I think I've mentioned before that I had a lot of hot rods in my neighborhood. This was a time, 1978, 1979, I had a lot of hot rods in the neighborhood, and I really wanted a hot rod. And looking at this Cougar, I thought it had pretty good body work. I thought, yeah, I'd really like to get that. Well, $50 later, and it was mine. So here it is, my first car. This is the day I brought it home. $50. I was able to drive it home. Yeah, it had a lot of problems. I mean, shoot, it was only like 11 years old at the time. But yeah, it had a lot of dents. The interior looked like Godzilla's playpen. But it was originally gold with a white interior and a 302 four-barrel motor, which was kind of a plus. And it had a couple of other little options. So the first thing I did, 14-year-old kid, I get out there and I clean this engine and I buy some Cobra valve covers and I buy a can of paint and do the intake and get a Holly carburetor for $50 brand new and dress up the engine, and here you go. That's what it looked like. Still ran crappy, but hey. And this was the end of the alley where I used to park my car all the time because, well, Dad wanted the driveway. So here's kind of what it looked like when I used to park it there in the neighborhood. Yeah, Mervin's Miracle is what they called it because it was a miracle the thing even ran. But anyway, I bought some side pipes and these really nice mag wheels that I got from they actually came from a Volkswagen that had a tilt front end, L60s on the back, F60s on the front. I thought it was a pretty good looking car back then. But anyway, I started doing the body work, and I really liked flame jobs, and so I did this with some of the Testors little bottled paint for the accents, and I think the yellow is just some spray can. And by this time I had it all primered up in this dark gray, sitting out there on Highland Drive with the hood off. Ooh boy, I thought this thing was so cool. And well, maybe it was. Front seats came out of a 1972 Plymouth Satellite. They were that kind of a blue metallic, very nice. I wanted high back buckets. I hated the low backs that were in there. So yeah, my car had some kind of weird things on it. But this is how it looked for a good portion of high school, just primered and with these flames. I eventually purchased an engine because this engine had a crack in it. So I purchased an engine, and by the time I was 16, I had a new rebuilt 302 in it. And here I am. I think I just turned 17 in this picture, just gotten a haircut because my hair was so long. And I'd actually taken some blue spray cans and painted the whole body blue because I wanted a blue Cougar. Oh, that looks so cool. By this time, I had put some high-rise manifold on it and some other things on the air cleaner to have it stick up through the hood and through my what was called a 5-inch Mopar hood scoop at the time. Anyway, by the time I was ready to graduate high school, here I am a few months before graduation, and I had actually got a real acrylic enamel paint job on this thing. It was like a Chevy Le Mans blue. Beautiful, beautiful paint job. Of course, the huge N50s with turbine rims in the back, and this was kind of how it looked when I finally wound up getting rid of it shortly after high school. I got married right out of high school, had our first child, and well, I started getting that itch for another Cougar because that one had fallen apart and I got rid of it. And I found this one at a car lot of all things, and it was an XR7, a '67 XR7. It was all white, and it had a 302 that wound up having like five of the 8 cylinders worked. I put my turbine rims that I had from my other car on here and my side pipes, and I put on these black stripes on the side. But eventually, I got some better rims with big old N50s on the back. Ooh, how cool. And this hood scoop, and just primed the whole thing gray. So same car, just a different look. However, originally it was a 390 car. About this time, I purchased a 390 S code from a friend of mine that was parting out a Mustang GTA that had been hit in the back end and was really bad. So easy engine swap, considering that's what originally was in the car. And here is the final incarnation of this car. I got these nice spoke rims on it, these Goodyear tires, and I had this paint job done at Earl Scheib. It was actually a really good paint job, this kind of a midnight blue. The car was, well, it was gorgeous, it was fast, it was just an amazing piece of equipment until some things started to fall apart. So I had to sell it to get something more practical, but a few years later, here I am again. I find this for sale through the want ads, $300, and it runs. You can see it's got a door that's kind of bad, and just really stock nasty tires and rims. But hey, the interior was good, and it actually drove really good. So I drove this car. It was a 289 automatic, and I drove this car for a couple of years. So I drove the car like this with some decent rims on it for a couple of years, and wound up, well, in a divorce. And as soon as I got divorced, I immediately primed this thing, put my bigger tires and rims back on it, got some air shocks, and went and painted some flames on it. I don't know why. It was just one of those things. I guess I felt rebellious because now I was, quote, free, whatever. So, but I wound up selling this thing because, well, I needed something more practical. But you can see, blacked out the grill. The thing ran good. It was that 289, and it did run very, very good. And it looked pretty darn good. And when I had tried to sell it before I painted it, or before I primed it, I could get almost nothing for it. I sold it for like $800 now that it had the flames on it. Oh, here we go again. I get remarried a couple of years later, and well, what do I go to? Well, I find a Cougar, and I buy it. And this one had a few dents in it. This one had pretty decent rims. It actually was a good driving car, just a little bit beat up looking. But I used to deliver pizzas in the Rose Park area with this for a couple of years. Until it just completely fell apart. During this period of time, of course, got the itch, got to have another Cougar. I found this for $500 out in Tooele Valley. And this car had a 390 4-barrel in it with an automatic. Black interior, non-XR7. The car drove really, really well. The thing was, it just ate a ton of gas. But you can see, pretty darn good looking machine. But having a different color door and hood wasn't going to do, so I painted those with some stock colors, put this stripe on it, and really good looking machine. Got some original 1967 license plates and put on it, and I drove this car like this for a little while. But ultimately, I really wanted a GTE, so I sanded that car and I repainted it in GTE colors. Well, okay, the tan isn't really a GTE color, but I painted it to what I thought a GTE should look like. I got these Magnum 500 rims, and at this point, I thought, again, the car looked really good, and I was driving it every day until one day when I was at work, I got too close to a curb, smacked the front end, caused some damage. Anyway, I wound up having to after I fixed it, it just was never right. So again, I sold this car. And I don't want to tell you what I sold it for. It had to be around $1,000. Of course, the guy who got it loved it. So there was another Cougar here in our life at this time. This was more of a daily driver. I was out washing my car at a car wash one day, and this guy's in the stall next to me. We got to talking. He said the car was for sale. $800 later, it was mine. It had a real crappy Earlshire paint job on it. So I did sand that down, but the body was straight. The engine ran like a clock. No problems that way. This was our daily driver actually for a couple of years. And here it is after I had it repainted with a DuPont Centauri acrylic enamel in its original color. And I got these nice styled steel wheels, but other than that, it's pretty much the way we purchased it. This car was a great daily driver for a couple of years for the family. And actually I wound up selling this to the junkyard in the very end because, well, things started to fall apart on it. So being a collector type of personality, well, I picked this thing up for $150. Yes, it was complete, but it didn't have an engine or transmission. But it was that original seafoam, kind of a yellowish green color that somebody had taken like one spray can and tried to paint the whole car. Anyway, I did find an engine out of a 72 Comet 4-door that with a little 302 with an automatic, and I stuffed that in here. Got the interior fixed up nice. It was a white interior, and you can see here it is after I painted it with a nice, it was a Chevy teal color that was available at the time. So I painted it teal, got a eliminator type hood scoop on it, and this is how it was when we wound up selling it. I got a pretty good amount of money for this car when I sold it, but it was a really good car. It just wasn't practical for my huge family anymore. So I hope you enjoyed this, and stay tuned for part 2.